Yes, I did take a note from Kate Kavanaugh on that one. Um, Typewriters just have a nice aesthetic sound, so I thought it was very fitting to use her soundness at the beginning of the video. So, to answer your question, no, I do not normally type on a typewriter, and frankly, it's a little exhausting. However, the more I use it, the more I love it, and the more I think that maybe I should type on it more regularly. But probably short stories and not entire novels. So why am I typing on a typewriter when in the last video I said I wrote on a computer and by hand? The truth is that I am a fickle person and I survive on whimsy. I'm actually a fairy. I am kidding, obviously. um, that was a bad joke. But fairies are quite cool. And silliness aside, the reason I am typing on this is completely based on impulse. I cleaned out my living room and I unearthed this from a pile of random things. So I grabbed paper, which was notebook paper because at the time I had nothing else, and I sat down on my living room floor and I started to type at 8:30, and I completely forgot about time. And the next time I looked up at my phone to see the time, it was 10 o'clock. And here's the product. Not the whole story, just the beginning. And somehow this started with "Those Were the Days." With the lyrics of the 60s songs in my head, I started typing, although I did learn that the original song was actually in Russian, which is an interesting thing to learn. Um, so, with the title and the song in my head and at the top of the paper, I progressed down the page and it became a story about a group of friends who went to a lake every summer. Those were the days. They were days that we would remember for the rest of our lives, whether we wanted to or not. Every summer, me and my friends would go down to the lake. It was the only place we had no expectations that we needed to live up to. We were kings and queens at that lake. The world was at our feet. My favorite spot was a spot on a cliff on the far side of the lake. You either had to swim straight across and climb the rock, or you had to walk a half an hour around the edge of the lake. If you went around the other side, it took an hour. But the trick was that I had to get there secretly. So the route changed depending on where people were at any given time. I don't know why I kept it a secret, but in all those years we went to the lake, I never told anybody about it. But that didn't seem to be enough to keep people away, to keep people from finding out. Or maybe they always knew and just let me keep my secret. So, I have kept working on this story. That's what's on here right now, is this story, still on notebook paper. And I think it's going to be a short stories in, this is bugging me. I think it's going to be a short stories in a series of short stories that have been fluttering in the back of my head for quite a while. And so far, I love this story. I made it set in the 60s, mostly because of the song, partially because of the typewriter, and completely because it seems so much simpler to write things in the past. And that's what I wanted for the story. I wanted something simple and raw, and it's just interesting for me to write this particular story on a typewriter because I wrote it in first person and it makes me feel closer to the main character. So this particular typewriter was my grandmother's. I was not very close to my grandparents. They passed away a few years ago, And my father and my uncle have been organizing their house. And we've gotten a few things from our grandparents' house that our parents have given us. And since I was the writer in the family, I was offered the typewriter, which I gladly took. I think my dad really likes giving us some things from our grandparents. He loves telling us about all of the things and the stories that are behind them and helping us learn about our grandparents, which I am so grateful for because I didn't know a lot about them before. So, my grandmother used this to type up her papers in high school in the 1940s. And when I asked my dad about this, he told me that grandma was a valedictorian of her class. She received a full ride scholarship to a women's university, but she did turn it down and got married instead. Um, she only had one job, and that was as a secretary. And it's just really nice to learn about my family and learn this stuff from the past that I never knew. And it's interesting to type on the typewriter like she would have, like my parents would have for that matter, because both of my parents wrote on typewriters when they were in college in the 80s. And the world has changed quite a bit since then. And I'm sure that if you were talking to my mother, who is starting to do graduate school, that she would be very thankful that now she has a computer that she can type on instead of having to struggle with the typewriter and all the corrections you have to make. And side note, this thing is 80 years old and it's still functioning perfectly well, which is something a computer cannot boast about. So when I told my mom that I was typing on a typewriter, she gave me one of those looks that questioned my sanity. But I never had to struggle with an assignment typed on a typewriter, so I think that makes me feel more nostalgic about it, I guess. And I love the simplicity of writing on a typewriter. It's you and the words and nothing else, and the physicality helps you focus on whatever you're working on. And I couldn't imagine actually typing an entire novel on this thing, but it was interesting to write this story without having to edit it. I didn't have the editor brain on at all. I just wanted to type, and that's all I had to focus on. And it was a nice writing exercise to just focus and not have to think about anything else. And I'm thinking about taking this to school with me and to have my creative writing kids mess around with it. And I kind of want to see what they come up with and if they have the same experience as I did. So, before I end up this video, I have two questions for you. Number one is, do you have any heirlooms in your family that have some interesting stories behind them? And number two, have you ever written on a typewriter? What was your experience with it? Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope that you come back and watch another one of my videos. So thank you. Bye.